So, very good evening to all of you present here. I, Dr. Krishna Sinhamahapatra, welcome you to the third lecture of the series of lecture on the topic non-fictional prose, which is conducted by BARTI. You can find my details on the screen. And since it's a live session, you can put in your questions or anything you would like to ask in the chat box. And afterwards, after that, you can always connect with me on my channel, which is Krishna's Canvas. So, as I said, this is lecture number 3. We already had 2 lectures on this particular topic, wherein the introductory lecture was about the idea of non-fiction, how it is different from what fiction is, and what is the main purpose, wherein the idea of facts and adhering to facts and being true to what you are saying in this particular genre has been discussed. What are the different kinds of non-fictions, under which travelogues come in, your essays come in, different accounts and dictionaries and encyclopedias. Everything comes under this whole ambit of non-fiction, and we have specifically taken up certain writers and their non-fictional works. In the previous lecture, we have discussed it in the Indian context and the good non-fiction writers in India, how it started, how it evolved. And today we are going to take forward the discussion with few other important works which are covered or which come under the idea of non-fiction. So, the first text which we are discussing now for the analysis of non-fiction or to understand non-fiction better is a philosophical inquiry into the origin of our ideas of the sublime and beautiful. So, this is an essay by Locke. So, it is a part of non-fiction because it is an essay which is talking about the origin of our ideas of the sublime and beautiful. It is a philosophical inquiry. The term inquiry itself suggests that it is adhering to facts, it is adhering to important ideas and concepts. So, Locke's essay concerning human understanding of 1690 was the first attempt to give a survey of the mind's workings that was both comprehensive and post Aristotelian. Now, when we are talking about non-fiction, we cannot miss references to Socrates, references to Plato, references to Aristotle, because they framed the whole idea of literary criticism, and their literary criticism was based on their own investigation of understanding of facts and truth as it is around. Right? So, based on that, they have been writing. As a result, when we are reading something after that, it is in correlation to what they have already done. So, the workings that was both comprehensive, that is, it gave a complete idea, and post Aristotelian in the sense something which came after Aristotle's concepts of mimesis and his idea of how a play should be, how a drama should be. So it soon fostered intense interest in epistemology, that is study of knowledge and study of ideas, and psychology, that is human psyche, and ethics, that is the values and ethics which needs to be followed. So Burke seems to have worked on the imagination, the faculty of devising and combining ideas as an undergraduate, and continued to do so into the 1750s. The result, a philosophical inquiry into the origin of our ideas of the sublime and beautiful. So, this is the work which we are referring to currently, which is written by who? It is written by Edmund Burke. But this idea of philosophical inquiry into the origin of ideas of sublime and beautiful, you get relation to it in the very first essay which came across, which is Locke's essay concerning human understanding in the year 1690. So, you if you talk about different trends, for example, if you are writing a political write up now about anything which is going on around in the country, It will never be without any context. It will always have some kind of context. And that context for this particular work is the reference to Locke's essay concerning human understanding, which is both comprehensive and post-Aristotelian, and which fostered interest in epistemology and psychology. And here, Burke seems to have worked on the imagination, the faculty of devising and combining ideas as an undergraduate, and continued to do so in 1750s, whose result came in the form of a philosophical inquiry into the origin of our ideas of the sublime and beautiful, which emphasized, unsurprisingly, the activity of mind in making ideas and the influence of these upon conduct. So, activity of mind on making what? On making the ideas of the sublime and beautiful, and the influence of these ideas upon human conduct or how anyone carries himself. So, it was in the first place an exercise in clarifying ideas with an eye to refining the ways in which the arts affect the passions. In other words, a refinement of complex ideas was taken to be the precondition of a refinement of practice. So, a refinement of complex ideas was taken to be the precondition of a refinement of practice. So, it was based on, or it is an exercise of clarifying ideas with an eye to refining the ways in which the art affects the passions. In otherwise, refinement of complex ideas was taken to be the precondition of a refinement of practice. The roots of human activity, Burke thought, were the passions of curiosity, pleasure, and pain. So, curiosity stimulated the activity of mind on all matters. Now, ideas of pain and of pleasure corresponded respectively to self preservation and society, and society involved the passions of sympathy, imitation, and ambition. So, what did society involve? It involved the passions of sympathy, imitation, and ambition. So, imitation tended to establish what? Habit, and ambition to produce change. So, imitation tended to establish habit and ambition to produce change. So, when we are talking about imitation, means you are imitating somebody, following certain course which is already there. So, imitation tends or intends to establish what? To establish somebody's habit. And what does ambition do? Ambition produces some kind of change. So, sympathy did neither, but it did establish an interest in other people's welfare that extended to mental identification with them. So, the scope of sympathy could embrace anyone, unlike compassion, which applied only to those in a worse situation than oneself. Such width of concern had an obvious reference to the social order and may express also Burke's thinking about the theatre, because he is well known for his thoughts on theatre. The passions, understood in Burke's way, suggested at once that society as such answered to natural instincts, and that it comprised, that is, it consisted elements of continuity and improvement alike. Burke then proceeded to show that self preservation and its cognates suggested the complex idea of the sublime, and not least the idea of a God who was both active and terrible. So, beauty, on the other hand, comprised a very different set of simple ideas which originated in pleasure. So, sublime and beautiful therefore sprang from very different origins. The roots of human activity, Burke thought, were the passions of curiosity, pleasure, and pain, and Imitation intended to establish habit and ambition to produce the change. The passions, understood in Burke's way, suggested at once that society as such answered to natural instincts and that it comprised or consisted elements of continuity and improvement alike. And beauty, on the other hand, comprised a very different set of simple ideas which originated in pleasure. So these were certain findings of Burke, and he wrote these findings in his essay in a very truthful manner, which we can refer back to understand his logic and his argument. Now we move on to the next topic for discussion, which is Hobbes Leviathan. So these are all important works of non-fiction which are going to be discussed so that you get an idea as to what is non-fiction. And yes, hello Satish. So what are the areas which needs to be covered? So to protect us from inevitable anarchy, Thomas Hobbes argued we need a leader and protector whose position is governed by a contract with the people. Now, when we read literature, many a times we get reference of Leviathan to understand a concept. That is why Leviathan is a very good reference which you should actually understand. It is going to help you for understanding the topic of non-fiction, as well as you might need it for reference to the idea of non-fiction and understanding pieces of literature which are based on this particular topic. So Thomas Hobbes argues that we need a leader and protector whose position is governed by a contract with the people. So the interesting part over here is the contract with the people. And what do we mean by that? In the meantime, you should always also pay attention to this cover page, because this cover page also is interesting and we need to take a note of that as well. So, Leviathan, or the matter, form, and power of a commonwealth, ecclesiastical, and civil. So, Leviathan, uh, form and power of a commonwealth, ecclesiastical, and civil, commonly referred to as Leviathan, is a book written by Thomas Hobbes and published in 1651, revised edition 1668. So its name derives from the biblical Leviathan. So the name, from where do we get the name? The name is got from Bible. So it derives, or it gets its name from the biblical concept and name of Leviathan. So the work concerns the structure of society and legitimate government, and is regarded as one of the earliest and most influential examples of social contract theory. So the work concerns what? The work concerns the structure of society and legitimate government, and is regarded as one of the earliest and most influential examples of social contract theory. So we have to take note of what theory it is referring to. It is referring to the social contract theory. The previous page we have already discussed is the idea of the contract with the people. So influential example of social contract theory. Now, written during the English Civil War, it argues for a social contract and rule by an absolute sovereign. So, Hobbes wrote that civil war and the brute situation of a state of nature, the war of all against all, could be avoided only by a undivided, undivided government. So, written during the English Civil War, it argues for a social contract and rule by an absolute sovereign. So, Hobbes wrote that civil war and the brute situation of a state of nature could be avoided only by a strong and undivided government. So, who was Thomas Hobbes? So, Thomas Hobbes was a philosopher and royalist educated at Oxford. He spent periods living near Paris and also traveled around Europe. picking up a wide education in artistic, scientific, and philosophical thinking of the day. He worked as a tutor to the noble and wealthy, but not until his 40s did he start working in earnest, that is, seriously, on his own philosophical theory. So it is only in 40s that he actually started working seriously on his own philosophical theories. So Hobbes wrote many books and contributed to many academic fields, but his 1651 book, Leviathan, or the Matter, Form and Power of a Commonwealth, Ecclesial and Civil, is one of his best remembered work, or rather he is known for this phenomenal work of his. Now, what does Leviathan say about politics and society? So, Hobbes proposed that the natural basic state of humankind is one of anarchy, that is disorder. So, what is the basic state of humankind? It is anarchy. Now, with the strong dominating the weak, life for most people, he said, was solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Therefore, our one natural right is of self preservation. So, the natural right is the right of what? Of self preservation. In order to remove that basic fear between individuals or groups, Hobbes suggested that people should contract with a protector as the sovereign. Under this social contract, individuals give up all rights while those of the protector are absolute. So he did not, though, believe in divine right. Hobbes's key point was that any protector was there by specific agreement with their subjects. So, specific agreement with their subjects. This is the condition. So, there should be an agreement with the subjects or the people whom the protector or the person who is ruling is actually controlling or is ruling. So, there should be a particular contract with them. So, what's the story behind the cover illustration as we were discussing some time back? So, the famous cover engraving provided Leviathan with an enduringly striking image. So, a crowned giant emerges from the landscape, clutching a sword, which is a symbol of earthly power, and a crozier, a symbol of the church power. So the two powers and the unity of the two powers is represented. So emerges from the landscape, clutching what? Clutching a sword which is symbolizing earthly power, and crozier, a symbol of what? A symbol of church power. So the torso and arms of this colossus are composed of over 300 humans, showing how the people are represented by their contracted leaders. So, who draws his strength? Where does he draws his strength from? He draws his strength from which source? So the torso and arms of this colossus, this huge figure, are composed of 300 humans, showing how the people are represented by their contracted leader, who draws his strength from their collective agreement. So if this is the picture, you have to see that right from the hand and the torso, means this body, this entire part is actually consisting or is consisted with what? Of humans. Humans are consisting this body part. So underneath is a quote from the book of Job, that is, non est protestas super terramque comparatere. So there is no power on earth to be compared with him. This link is the figure to the biblical monster mentioned in Job that Hobbes's book is named after. So the name, that is Leviathan, which refers to Leviathan, whose reference we get in Bible, and this link is the figure to the biblical monster which is mentioned in Job, that is the book and after which this particular work is named. So was Leviathan a product of the Civil War? So, not directly. So, when Hobbes fled to Paris at the start of the conflict in 1642, he had already conceived many of the ideas in Leviathan. However, the issues he discusses were a matter of hot debate at the time. In the conflict between Parliament and Charles I, thoughts about a formal constitution raised questions about the rights of the individual. So, initially, these concentrated on who was allowed to vote, but the agreement of the people in 1649 also raised such issues as the freedom of worship, the fairness of trials and punishment, and equality under the law. So, in the conflict between Parliament and Charles I, thoughts about a formal constitution raised questions about the rights of the individual. So, initially, these concentrated on who was allowed to vote, but the agreement of the people in 1649 also raised such issues as the freedom of worship, the fairness of trials, and punishment inequality under the law. So, what happened after restoration? So, during the years of the Commonwealth, and after the restoration of the monarchy, others considered the true nature of an individual's rights and freedoms. But it was not until after the glorious revolution of 1688 and the Bill of Rights which followed that thinkers felt sufficiently free to express their views without fear of persecution. So, during the years of Commonwealth and after restoration of the monarchy, others considered the true nature of an individual's rights and freedoms, but it was not before glorious revolution of 1688 and the passing of the Bill of Rights which followed that thinkers felt sufficiently free to express their views without fear of persecution. So, until and unless you have a strong law in the country, it is very difficult to express your views because you do not know the consequences. Even in the present time, if you see, and when people are making some comments, what kind of repercussions they have to face, right? So, their ideas contributed to a growing understanding of political and human rights that would one day see a universal declaration of human rights. So it would lead to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Now, despite the restoration of the monarchy, the age of enlightenment had yet to dawn. And those who promoted their ideas about rights and freedoms would find their lives in danger. So their thoughts, though, contributed to the understanding about the very nature of rights and their place in society. So their thoughts contributed to what? To the understanding about the very nature of rights and their place in society. So what impact did Leviathan have? So Hobbes's concept of a social contract was taken up by others who developed it in different directions. Men such as Algernon Sidney and most notably John Locke, author of an essay concerning human understanding, which we were referring to at the very beginning of today's lecture. So they were influenced by the concept of social contract, which we see. Yes, Umesh, hello. So, which we see in this particular text, which is Leviathan, the idea of social contract. So, Leviathan is now recognized as a cornerstone of Western political philosophy. So, what is Leviathan now concerned? It is recognized as a cornerstone of Western political philosophy, particularly in its ideas of a social contract between ruler and rule. So, the main idea which we have to keep in mind, all of you, is that the concept of the social contract, which is a kind of it's gluing together the idea of the ruler and the ruled, and the kind of relation which should be there between the ruled and the ruler. Now, after discussing about the social contract and the idea of Leviathan, how did it get its title, what was the impact of Leviathan, how it actually kind of influenced many other writers, we will now move on to the next text for discussion. So the next text, which is the third text for discussion. So a modest proposal, in full, a modest proposal for preventing the children of poor people from being a burden to their parents or the country, and for making them beneficial to the public, by Jonathan Swift. This is what we are going to do now. So it is a satiric essay by Jonathan Swift, published in pamphlet form in 1729. So this is a satiric essay which was published by Jonathan Swift in 1729. It is presented in the guise, that is disguise, of an economic treatise. The essay proposes that the country ameliorate poverty in Ireland by butchering the children of the Irish poor and selling them as food to wealthy English landlords. So, it is presented in the guise or disguise of an economic treatise, wherein the essay proposes that the country ameliorate poverty in Ireland by what? By butchering the children of the Irish poor and selling them as food to wealthy English landlords. So Swift's proposal is a savage comment on England's legal and economic exploitation of Ireland. The essay is a masterpiece of satire that is making very shrewd comments with a blend of rational deliberation and unthinkable conclusion. And its title has come to symbolize any proposition to solve a problem with an effect but outrageous cure. So, its title has come to symbolize any proposition to solve a problem with an effective but outrageous cure. So, Jonathan Swift's attack on the British government's inability to solve the problem of poverty in Ireland is one of the literary canon's most famous examples of satire. So, what is the main idea? Attack on the British government's inability for what? To solve the problem of poverty in Ireland, and is one of the literary canon's most famous examples of satire. So, a modest proposal for preventing the children of poor people from being a burden to their parents or country and for making them beneficial to the public was published anonymously without any name in 1729. The modest proposal proposes that the most obvious solution to Ireland's economic crisis is for the Irish to sell their children as food. Shockingly, it also suggests various ways in which they can be prepared and served. So, crisis for the Irish to sell their children as food. Shockingly, it also suggests various ways in which they can be prepared and served. So, the detached, serious tone of its narrator emphasizes the horror of what Swift is actually recommending. Only in the final paragraphs, when the essay turns to the realities of the Irish economic system and the problems caused by absentee landlords, does the author's real view become clear. Now, despite its power as a piece of rhetoric, a modest proposal did not lead to any lasting changes for India's, or rather for Ireland's rural poor. Just over a century later, thousands would perish in the Great Famine. So, this is talking about the actual and practical situation existing in Ireland. Now, we will move on to a collection of essays by George Orwell, which also come under the category of non-fiction. As we discussed, that essay is one of the subgenres of the idea of non-fiction. So, Orwell is known around the world for his satirical novella Animal Farm and his dystopian novel 1984. But he was arguably at his best in the essay form. So he was one of the best essay writers and he was in the best form while writing essays. So there are 10 examples of his essays. So the first example is Why I Write. So this 1946 essay is notable for at least two reasons. One, it gives us a neat little autobiography detailing Orwell's development as a writer. And two, it includes four motives for writing. So, as we have already discussed, that when we are talking about nonfiction, it is about such kind of writing wherein the writing is addressing to real events, to actual thoughts and actual practices. So, if we talk about Plato or Aristotle or Socrates, they have given their own theory of understanding of how to deal with different genres of literature, and rather what is art, what is imitation, what is mimesis, and they are based on their own take on them. When we think of what is the contribution of Arnold and his touchstone method, then we understand that when he is talking about this, he is actually talking about his own belief system upon or talking about his ideas regarding that topic. Then, when we are talking about other writers who have actually written essays, who have done critic or who have been good critics of certain topics, they have also shared their views and ideas on that particular topic. And if we have to understand their perspective, we have to read such examples of nonfiction because they will give us the idea and the way we should focus on that particular topic. So here also, this 1946 essay is also, is notable, that is, it is significant for at least two main reasons. One, it gives us a neat little autobiography detailing Orwell's development as a writer, which is very significant because it is more about a kind of autobiographical tone to it, wherein detailing his own development as a writer. So that is point number one. What is point number one? That it gives us a neat little autobiography dealing or detailing Orwell's development as a writer. And two, it includes, what is two? It includes four motives for writing, which break down as egoism, wanting to seem clever, aesthetic enthusiasm, taking delight in the sounds of words, etc., the historical impulse, wanting to record things for posterity, and the political purpose, that is, wanting to push the world in a certain direction. So it includes what? It includes four motives for writing, which break down as egoism, that is, wanting to seem clever, that is, look clever, aesthetic enthusiasm, this is taking delight in the sounds of words, then the historical impulse, that is wanting to record things for posterity, and the political purpose, that is wanting to push the world in a certain direction. So these are the different parameters which he has included in this essay. And as the title is very, very evident, it actually tells us that he has written it with this entire thing in his mind, that why he writes, why I write. And it charts his journey as a writer and includes his main four motives for writing, which include egoism, aesthetic enthusiasm, the historical impulse, and political purpose. Next comes the next work, which is Politics and the English Language. So, the English language is in a bad way, Orwell argues in this famous essay from 1946. As its title suggests, Orwell identifies link between the degraded English language of his time and the degraded political situation also of his time. So Orwell sees modern political discourse as being less a matter of words chosen for their clear meanings than a series of stock phrases slung together. So Orwell sees modern political discourse as being less a matter of words chosen for their clear meanings than a stock phrases series of stock phrases done what? Series of stock phrases slung together. Orwell concludes with 6 rules or guidelines for political writers and essayists, which include: never use a long word when a short one will do, or a specialist or foreign term when a simpler English one should suffice. So he concludes with 6 rules or guidelines for political writers and essayists, which include: point number 1, never use a long word when a short one will do. And it is actually a common principle for any kind of communication. If you can speak and communicate in an easy way, there is no need to actually use long words. Or a specialist or foreign term when a simpler English one would suffice. So instead of substituting one easy word with a word which any specialist or a foreign term which others cannot use, so instead of using them, it is always good to use a short word. Next is shooting and elephant. So this is an early Orwell essay from 1936. So this is an early Orwell essay from 1936. In it, he recalls his possibly fictionalized experiences as a police officer in Burma when he had to shoot an elephant. So, shoot an elephant that had got out of hand. So, Orwell extrapolates from this one event, seeing it as a microcosm of imperialism, wherein the colonizer loses his humanity and freedom through oppressing others. So, this one event, wherein seeing it as a microcosm of imperialism, wherein the colonizer loses his humanity and freedom through oppressing others. So, what does he recall in this particular 1936 essay is that his experience as a police officer in Burma when he had to shoot an elephant, and that is from where the title has come, shooting an elephant. Shoot an elephant that had so shooting an elephant that had gone out of hand. So Orwell extrapolates from this one event, seeing it as a microcosm of imperialism wherein the colonizer loses his humanity and freedom through oppressing others. So, can you understand the comparison over here? It is an elephant, wherein this elephant, what has happened to the elephant? Wherein this elephant is envisioned as the power, the power structure which is controlling the subordinates below them. So, elephant is controlling its here when the elephant had gone out of its hand, that is, had become wild, it was going here and there, and Orwell kind of compares this as imperialism, wherein the colonizer loses his humanity and freedom through oppressing others. So, the colonizer or the people who are making colonies, who are forming colonies, are compared with an elephant which loses control and is out of hand. Like just like when the colonizer loses his humanity and freedom through oppressing others, wherein the colonizer loses his humanity and freedom. Why? Because he keeps on oppressing the people whom he has colonized. Next is decline of the English mother. So in this 1946 essay, Orwell writes about the British fascination with murder, focusing in particular on the period of 1850 to 1925, which Orwell identifies as the golden age or great period in murder in the media and literature. But what has happened to murder in the British newspapers? So Orwell claims that the Second World War has desensitized people to brutal acts of killing, but also that there is less style and art in modern murders. So he is talking about the act of murder, how it has declined lately, how it has reduced in the recent times, how or what happened to murder in the British newspaper. So Orwell claims that the Second World War has desensitized people to brutal acts of killing, but also that there is less style and art in modern, that is the murders which were happening during that time. So that art of murdering was gone according to him. Then is the Confessions of a Book Reviewer. So this 1946 essay makes book reviewing as a profession or trade something that seems so appealing and aspirational to many book lovers. So look like a life of drudgery. Now why? Orwell asks, does virtually every book that's published have to be reviewed? It would be best, he argues, to be more discriminating and devote more column inches to the most deserving of books. So book reviewing is a kind of a profession which is taken up by many people. Many people do it out of passion, wherein you read a book and then you write a review about it. Just the way we have got the movie reviewers. When a movie is released, you will have the reviewers who will watch the movie and then immediately write their feedback about the movie, review about the movie. Similarly, there are book reviewers, wherein book reviewing is a profession or trade, something that seems so appealing and aspirational to many book lovers, look like a life of drudgery. So, why Orwell asks, does virtually every book that's published have to be reviewed? And then he says it would be best, he argues, to be more discriminate and devote more column inches to the most deserving of books. So, choosing a good book, then giving space to the review of that book. So, all these things are important in order to understand the role of a book reviewer, and that is what this essay tells us all about. Next is a hanging. So, this is another Burmese recollection from Orwell and a very early works dating from 1931. So Orwell describes a condemned criminal being executed by hanging, using this event as a way into thinking about capital punishment and how, as Orwell put it elsewhere, a, a premeditated execution can seem more inhuman than 1,000 murders. So, this is another Burmese recollection. If you remember when we were discussing about Orwell, or if in general, if you know about Orwell, then he has written about his own accounts, his own feelings, his own kind of journey. And here he describes a condemned criminal, a criminal who is condemned, being executed by hanging, using this event as a way into thinking about capital punishment and how, as Orwell put it elsewhere, a premeditated execution can seem more inhuman than 1,000 murders. So, a premeditated execution can seem more inhuman than 1,000 murders, and it includes or is included in the Burmese recollection from Orwell, and it is a very early work dating from 1931. Then comes the lion and the unicorn. So, subtitle Socialism and the English Genius. What is the subtitle? Socialism and the English Genius. This is another essay Orwell wrote about Britain in the wake of the outbreak of the Second World War. Now, published in 1941, this essay takes its title from the heraldic symbols for England, the lion, and Scotland, the unicorn. So Orwell argues that some sort of socialist revolution is needed to wrest Britain out of its outmoded ways, and an overhaul of the British class system will help Britain to defeat the Nazis. The long essay contains a section which is titled England, Your England, which is often reprinted as a stand-alone essay written as the German bomber planes were whizzing overhead during the Blitz of 1941. This part of the essay is a critique of blind English patriotism during wartime and an attempt to pin down English values at a time when England itself was under threat from Nazi invasion. So it is a critique, and critique of what? Critique of the English patriotism and it is during the wartime an attempt to pin down English values when England itself was under threat from Nazi invasion. The next point is my country, right or left. So this 1940 essay shows what a complex and nuanced thinker Orwell was when it came to political labels such as left wing and right wing. So, although Orwell was on the left, he also held patriotic, although not exactly fervently nationalistic, attitudes towards England, which many of his comrades on the left found baffling. So, as with England Your England above, the wartime context is central to Orwell's argument and lends his discussion of the relationship between left wing politics and patriotic values and urgency and immediacy. So, the 1940 essay shows what a complex and nuanced thinker Orwell was when it came to political labels such as left wing and right wing. And although Orwell was on the left, he also held patriotic attitudes towards England, which many of his comrades on the left found baffling. So, even though your political interest and your political labels state that you belong to this party or the other party, but your attitude towards your country and your beliefs towards your country, they are supposed to remain neutral, and that is what happens here, that many of his comrades on the left found his attitude towards England, that is what kind of the patriotic attitude towards England, little baffling, that is surprising. As with England Your England above, the wartime context is central. What is central? The wartime context is central to Orwell's argument and lends his discussion of the relationship between left wing politics and patriotic values and urgency and immediacy. So, as with England Your England above, the wartime context is central to Orwell's argument and lends his discussion of the relationship between left wing politics and patriotic values and urgency and immediacy. So, this is what this idea that, right or left, whichever way he goes, that is, whichever party, that is the left wing or the right wing, he kind of is a part of, his idea and his promise towards his country, his patriotism towards his country is undeterred. Then comes Bookshop Memories. As well as writing on politics and being a writer, Orwell also wrote perceptively about readers and book buyers, as in this 1936 essay, which was published the same year as his novel. What is the novel? Keep the Aspidistra Flying, which combined both bookshops and writers. The novel focuses on Gordon Comstock, an aspiring poet. So, in Bookshop Memories, reflecting on his own time working as an assistant in a bookshop, Orwell divides those who haunt bookshops into various types. What are the types? The snobs, after a first edition, the Oriental students, and so on. So, these are the different divisions which he makes. So, in the Bookshop Memories, reflecting on his own time working as an assistant in a bookshop, Orwell divides those who haunt bookshops into various types, including the snobs after a first edition, the Oriental students, and so on. That is, there are other examples as well. Then we come to his other work, which is his other essay, which is A Nice Cup of Tea. So Orwell didn't just write about literature and politics. He also wrote about things like the perfect pub and how to make the best cup of tea for the London Evening Standard in the 1940s, that is, in the late 1940s. How would you define the best cup of tea for the London Evening Standard in the late 1940s? So, here in this essay from 1946, Orwell offers 11 golden rules for making a tasty cuppa, arguing that people disagree vehemently how to make a perfect cup of tea because it is one of the mainstays of civilization. So, what does he write about? He not only writes about politics, he not only write about his patriotism, he does not only write about the party which he believes in and which he supports, but he also writes about things like the perfect pub, things like the best cup of tea, suitable for London Evening Standard of that particular time. And this particular essay, he offers 11 golden rules for making a tasty kappa, arguing that people disagree vehemently how to make a perfect cup of tea because it is one of the main stays of civilization, because it is one of the things which is followed the civilization. So as we discussed all these topics, all these essays of Orwell, we could see that he has written essays on varied topics. If one is why I write, that is why he is writing. The other is politics and the English language. Then comes the idea of shooting an elephant, wherein the comparison of an elephant with the idea of imperialism, an elephant which has gone out of hand, and imperialism which has lost its control of humanity and freedom in order to oppress people and others, comes in. Then the decline of the English murder. So, the idea of murder and how there has been a decline and what happens related to that. Confessions of a book reviewer. So, about book reviewing and the effects of book reviewing and what kind of effects it has in general. And then a hanging, wherein thinking about the capital punishment and how he has put elsewhere a premeditated execution can seem more inhuman than 1,000 murders. That is, you are actually ordering somebody to murder a person, hang a person. That is, you are giving capital punishment to a person when you are in your own consciousness, being conscious of the fact that a person is losing his life. You are actually asking to do this activity, which is a very, very inhuman concept, and definitely inhuman than 1,000 murders. Then the Lion and the Unicorn, wherein he wrote about the wake of the outbreak of Second World War. and published in 1941. This essay takes its title from the heraldic symbols for England, that is the lion, and for Scotland, the unicorn. Finally, my country, right or left, then Bookshop Memories, and finally, he even talks about a nice cup of tea and how to make a nice cup of tea. So, with these discussions, we come to the end of today's lecture. Thank you so much, all of you, for joining in. Have a good day ahead. Any doubts, you can get in touch with me in the next session. Thank you.